Think for a moment, when was the last time you made a decision without a single second of doubt? You probably can't remember. We think confusion is something external, the wrong situation, the wrong people, the wrong time. So we change the situation, we change the people, and the confusion is still right there. Steven Cesari wrote something in this book that seems strange the first time you read it. He said, "Confusion is not a problem. It's a signal. And until you understand what that signal is telling you, every solution will just be another loop." So the question is, what is that signal, and why have you been ignoring it all this time? Now think about this, if confusion is a signal, where is that signal coming from? Sometimes it comes from values that aren't even yours, you've just been carrying them around for so long. And sometimes it comes from a lack of vision that you think you have, but actually don't. But there's one thing that's more dangerous than all of this, and it works so quietly that you never manage to catch it. And one more thing, what Cesari saved for last, is probably the first thing you should have understood. And that's the exact question Book Echo English asks of every book: what is the one thing you should have understood first? If you enjoy books that make you think, this channel is worth subscribing to. We've all felt it at some point, a strange restlessness, where everything seems fine on the surface, but something just won't settle. There's a job, a routine, people around you, and yet there's an emptiness you can't quite define. And we usually look for the answer outside. A new job, a new city, a new circle. We tell ourselves that once the situation changes, the clarity will follow. But the situation changes, and that restlessness is still right there. Cesari gave this restlessness a name in clarity, and that name is values conflict. Confusion doesn't actually happen when life gets hard. Confusion happens when you're doing something that doesn't match your values. And here's the interesting part, most people don't even know what their values actually are. Think about it, if someone asked you right now to name the 5 most important things in your life, could you answer without hesitating? Most people can't. And that's the root of the problem. We aren't born with values, we absorb them. From home, from society, from the people who were around us. And sometimes those values were never ours to begin with, we've just been carrying them for so long that they start to feel like ours. One person stays in a career for years because it was respected at home. Another stays in a relationship because leaving feels selfish. Another keeps chasing goals that were never actually theirs. And every single day they live against the values that are deep down truly theirs, that signal comes through. That same restlessness. That same confusion. Cesari says the first step to finding clarity is not to build a new plan. The first step is to identify what you actually value, and what you only thought you were supposed to value. That distinction seems small. But that distinction changes everything. Because when you know your values, every decision doesn't become easy, but every decision does become clear. And that's what clarity means, not easy, clear. But knowing your values isn't enough. Because there's something else that makes confusion go even deeper, and that's a lack of direction. There's actually a difference between goals and vision that most people never notice, and that difference determines whether you're moving forward in your life or just staying busy. For moving forward, there are goals, tasks, plans. But months later when we look back, it feels like we did so much, and still didn't get anywhere. And Cesari says the reason isn't the goals. The reason is that there was no vision behind those goals. So what's the difference between vision and a goal? A goal is a destination. Vision is the reason that destination matters. One person says, I want to lose 10 kilos this year. That's a goal. But ask them why, and the answer is, just to stay healthy. And that answer is so vague that the brain doesn't take it seriously. But there's another person who says, I want to play with my child without getting tired. I want to become the kind of person my family feels proud of. That's vision. And that vision gives that goal a completely different weight. Cesari says vision is what keeps you moving even on the days when you have zero motivation. Because motivation is a feeling, it comes and goes. But vision is a direction, it stays. And here's the real problem. We set goals because we feel like we should be achieving something. But vision is formed when you genuinely know what kind of life you want to live. And most people have never seriously asked themselves that question. Cesari suggests an exercise, and it's as uncomfortable as it is simple. He says, look at every important area of your life. Health, relationships, career, finances, personal growth. And for each area, ask one question: where do I want to be in 5 years, and why? That why is the vision. And when that vision is clear, goals automatically start to align around it. You don't have to convince yourself every single day. The direction is already set. But there's one more thing Cesari notices, and that is that many people do have a vision, and still can't act on it. And the reason isn't goals. It isn't vision. The reason is something that runs so quietly inside your mind that you can't even hear it, until it gets loud. Many people have vision. They have direction. And still they can't act on it. And often the reason isn't any external obstacle. The reason is the voice that comes from within. Every time you think about doing something new, a voice shows up. You can't do this. You tried before, remember how that went. What will people think? These voices are so familiar that we start mistaking them for our own. But Cesari says, that is not your voice. That is your programming. And programming is built over years. Every time someone said, you can't do it. Every time you failed and judged yourself for it. Every time you compared yourself to someone else and came up short. All of it forms a layer. And that layer is so invisible that it starts to feel like reality. Self-talk is actually the continuous conversation you have with yourself at all times, not consciously, but automatically. And research says that a person thinks roughly 50,000 thoughts a day. And most of them are negative. Wait, 50,000. And how many of those do you consciously choose? Maybe not even 1%. The rest are all patterns that your brain has set on autopilot. Cesari says positive self-talk is not some feel-good trick. It's actually a reprogramming. When you deliberately notice your thoughts and replace them, you are literally changing the default patterns of your brain. And the simpler it sounds, the more it gets ignored. Because we tell ourselves that self-talk isn't a real problem. Real problems are out there. But a person who is telling themselves every single day, I'm not worthy of this, no matter how good their external situation is, they will not find clarity. Because clarity isn't just about thoughts, clarity is also about the belief you have in yourself. And when that belief is broken, every decision will carry doubt. Every step will come with hesitation. But there's one more layer Cesari uncovers, and that is that negative self-talk doesn't work alone. It has a partner, and that partner is clutter. Everything that is unnecessarily filling your mind, your space, and your life, quietly draining your energy without ever letting you know. Think about an experiment. You're sitting in a room where there's stuff scattered everywhere. Old files, unused things, everything that was kept thinking, it'll come in handy someday. And you're told, now think clearly, make an important decision. How hard would that feel? That is exactly what's happening in your life, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. Cesari says clutter isn't just the things sitting around your home. Clutter exists on 3 levels. The first is physical clutter, the environment you live in. Scattered objects, disorganized space, everything in front of your eyes that your brain is constantly processing, whether you notice it or not. The second is mental clutter, the unfinished tasks stuck in your head. The conversations that should have happened but didn't. The decisions that needed to be made but keep getting pushed off. Every unfinished loop quietly takes a piece of your mental energy, in the background, without a sound. And the third is emotional clutter, and this is the heaviest of all. The relationships that drain you but don't get left behind. The grudges that have been carried for years. The guilt tied to some old mistake that still takes up space in the present. And all three together create a noise in which no one can think clearly. Cesari says something very interesting. He says clarity doesn't come from adding. Clarity comes from subtracting. That line seems strange the first time you read it. We always think we need more knowledge, more information, more resources. But what actually matters more is removing what's already unnecessarily filling the space. A simple example: the day you clean your desk, organize your phone, finally have that conversation you've been avoiding, that day everything suddenly feels a little lighter. That's not a coincidence. Your brain gets back the energy that was going into managing all that clutter. And when that energy comes back, thinking gets clearer. Decisions get easier. That confusion that had been sitting there for weeks, it suddenly gets a little smaller. But even after clearing the clutter, one problem remains, and that is that many people don't know where to direct that newly freed energy. Because when everything feels important, nothing is important. And that's where a whole new kind of confusion begins, the confusion of priorities. Think about this: how many hours do you have in a day? 24. The same for everyone. Elon Musk gets 24, and so do you. So where's the difference? The difference isn't who has more time. The difference is who knows where to put that time. Cesari says most people have a silent problem in their life, and that is that they treat everything as equally important. Every task feels urgent. Every commitment feels necessary. Every person's expectation feels like it needs to be met. And when everything is a priority, nothing actually is. This is where Cesari brings in an idea from economics, the Pareto principle. You've probably heard of the 80-20 rule. The idea says that 20% of your actions produce 80% of your results. But most people know this as a theory, they never apply it practically. Cesari gives a specific way to apply it to life. He says, look at every area of your life and ask, what are the 2 to 3 actions that, if done consistently, would make the most difference? Those are your high payback activities. And those come first. Everything else comes after. That sounds simple. But actually doing it is deeply uncomfortable. Because it means deliberately giving less importance to everything else. Not replying to emails that feel urgent but aren't important. Not attending meetings that take your time but aren't connected to your progress. Saying no to people whose priorities are not your priorities. And that no, that's the hardest part. We live in a society where being busy is worn like a badge. The busier you are, the more important you seem. But Cesari says busyness and productivity are two different things. Busy is the person who says yes to everything. Productive is the person who knows what to say yes to. And knowing that is only possible when your priorities are crystal clear. One interesting thing, when you identify your high payback activities and do them consistently, something strange happens. That overwhelm you used to feel every single day, it slowly starts to fade. Because your brain is finally working in one clear direction. But there's one more layer. Because even after priorities become clear, many people keep putting off the work that matters most. And the reason isn't laziness, the reason is something else entirely, something that doesn't show up on the surface. We all procrastinate. And we all know it's wrong. And yet it happens. Over and over again. So the question isn't what procrastination is. The question is why it doesn't stop, even when you know better. Cesari says something about this that sounds a little surprising the first time you hear it. He says, procrastination is not laziness. It's a lack of clarity. When you genuinely don't know why a task is important, where it's leading, and what it will actually change in your life, your brain automatically starts avoiding it. That's not a weakness of the brain. That's the brain's protection mechanism. The brain always wants to conserve energy. And a task that is unclear, whose outcome is vague, whose why is missing, investing energy in that feels wasteful to the brain. So it resists. Think about it, when you're doing something that genuinely excites you, whose purpose you clearly understand, do you still have to force yourself to start? Probably not. Because in that case, procrastination automatically fades. Cesari says if you keep putting off a task again and again, the first question shouldn't be, why am I so lazy? The first question should be, do I actually know why this task matters in my life? And often the answer is, no. Either the task is someone else's priority that you've taken on, or it is yours, but the connection to your vision was never clearly established. And without that connection, that task will always keep shifting to tomorrow. How does this insight work in practice? The next time you're putting off an important task, do one thing. Right after that task, this matters because. And genuinely fill in that blank. If you can't fill it in, then maybe that task isn't actually your priority at all. And if you can fill it in, that reason alone will be enough to get you started. Because when the why is clear, the how and when automatically follow. But there's one last thing missing from this entire puzzle. You've identified your values, built a vision, cleared the clutter, set your priorities, understood procrastination, but none of this goes anywhere until one very simple but very powerful thing happens. And that thing is, writing it down. One question, where are your goals right now? In your head? In some old diary that hasn't been opened in months? In a notes app you created last year? Or nowhere at all? And that, nowhere at all, that's the problem. Cesari says a thought about goal and a written goal are not the same thing. And that difference isn't just paper and pen. That difference is psychological. When you think something, that thought comes and goes. The brain treats it like a possibility. But when you write it down, the brain starts treating it like a commitment. There's a famous study from Harvard Business School that tracked a group of students. The students who had written goals achieved 10 times more than everyone else. 10 times. That wasn't just a difference in discipline. That was a difference in clarity. Because when a goal is written down, it can't stay vague. It has to be specific. The moment you try to write, I want to be successful, you realize yourself that this isn't a goal. That's when you're forced to get specific. Cesari suggests a structure for written goals. He says, the goal should be specific, it should have a clear deadline, and most importantly, there should be a reason written alongside it. That why we talked about in the vision topic. Because without a reason, even a written goal becomes a dead list. And one more thing, Cesari says that after writing your goals, reviewing them regularly is just as important. Not every day, but at least once a week. Because what you regularly see, your brain automatically starts treating as important. And what the brain treats as important, it starts finding ways to move toward it. This isn't magic. It's simply giving your brain a clear direction. And when the direction is clear, that confusion from the beginning, the one that was coming through like a signal, it slowly starts to settle. But there's still one thing left. All of this, values, vision, clutter, priorities, procrastination, written goals, these are all tools. And tools only work when there's a compelling enough reason to use them. And that reason, that missing piece, if you've stayed with it this far, it's coming right now. If you've made it this far, you're already ahead of 90% of people. We've covered a lot up to this point. Values, vision, clutter, priorities, procrastination, written goals. And if you look at it honestly, most of these things you already knew. In some form or another. So the question is, if you knew, why doesn't it get applied? Cesari says the answer comes down to one thing, a compelling reason. And this is the most underrated idea in clarity. A compelling reason isn't something that makes you feel good. It's something that moves you. Something so real, so personal, that ignoring it becomes impossible. Think about it, a doctor tells you that you should exercise. You listen, you say yes, and you forget about it. That is not a compelling reason. But if that same doctor says, you are at serious risk of a heart attack within the next 5 years, suddenly that same advice feels different. Suddenly putting off exercise doesn't feel like an option. What changed? Not the information. The stakes changed. A compelling reason is where the stakes feel real. Cesari says most people's goals fail because there's no compelling reason behind them. There's a vague desire: I want a better life, I want to be successful, I want to be happy. But these are so hollow that the brain doesn't take them seriously. And when the brain doesn't take them seriously, the moment the first difficulty arrives, everything collapses. So how do you find a compelling reason? Cesari shares a simple but powerful exercise. He says, take your most important goal. And then ask yourself, if I don't achieve this, what will my life look like 5 years from now? 10 years from now? And the more uncomfortable that picture is, the better. Because when you can clearly see the cost of not doing it, the reason for doing it automatically gets stronger. And the second question, if I do achieve this, what will actually change in my life? And who will that change matter to, just me, or also the people who matter to me? When both sides are clear, a tension is created. One side is where you don't want to end up. The other side is where you want to go. And that tension is your compelling reason. That is what makes all the other tools actually work. Values matter when there's a compelling reason to protect them. Vision gives direction when there's a compelling reason behind it. Written goals work when there's a compelling reason behind them. The compelling reason is the foundation on which clarity stands. And now that this foundation is clear, let's look back once more and see what we actually understood across this entire journey. So throughout this entire journey, we saw one thing again and again, that confusion is not an external problem. We saw that confusion is created when there's a gap between our values and our actions. And those values often aren't even ours, we've just been carrying them for so long that they start to feel like they are. We saw that having goals isn't enough, not without a clear vision behind them. That moves you even on the days when motivation is nowhere to be found. We understood that clutter doesn't only exist on the outside, it exists on mental and emotional levels too. And clarity doesn't come from adding, it comes from subtracting. We saw that when everything is a priority, nothing is a priority, and identifying your high payback activities is what real focus actually looks like. We understood that procrastination is not laziness, it's a lack of clarity. When the why is clear, the when follows on its own. We saw that written goals are fundamentally different from thought-about goals, because writing is a commitment. And finally, we understood that all of these tools only work when there's a compelling reason behind them. Now one small thing, before you go to sleep tonight, ask yourself just one question. If the next 5 years pass exactly like this, would that be okay? And that is the shift Cesari talks about throughout the entire book, that when you can clearly see what you want and why you want it, every decision doesn't become easy, but it does become clear. But one question still remains. Once clarity arrives, where do you point it? Because a person who has clarity in their life, but whose thinking about money is still the same old thinking they were taught at home, that person will still be stuck. Robert Kiyosaki said something in Rich Dad Poor Dad that is deeply uncomfortable, that the difference between the poor and the rich isn't just money. It's the mindset that forms from childhood, and that most people never stop to question. That's exactly what we'll look at in the next video. If this channel gives you the kind of perspective you don't normally find, it's worth subscribing. One book, one new way of thinking. This was Book Echo English, where it's not books that are read, but life itself. Wait. Don't leave yet. There's 2 more video. And if you miss it, what you just understood will stay incomplete. Watch it now.